Hi guys, my name is Chasty King and I am in long-term abstinent-based recovery from addiction, opioids and among other substances. And in this video, you will hear me speak to a freshman class at Bessemer City High School where I was a former student, sharing my experience with addiction, faith, and recovery. So tune in and I hope you can learn something. But first, I just want to thank everybody here for actually showing up to class and listening. I know there was several times that I walked into this school and skipped class, walked right back out to go get high. So it speaks volumes that you are even here in this chair today, and I want to honor that and I want to acknowledge that. So thank you for that. I am a writer. I am an author, so I have started to write a book about the story of my life. So I'm going to read you just a short clip of what is in that book, and then I will get more into my story, which will be very brief because we don't have much time left. From the years 2010 until 2015, I would be seen countless times by medical professionals while my mental state progressively deteriorated and my physical state worsened. I was described as a patient who was quite fragile, only weighing 87 pounds at 5 feet tall. Overdose, suicide attempts, and totaling cars while intoxicated became my norm. Time and again, I would be seen for infections and sexually transmitted diseases from promiscuous activity. Other times, the doctor would be lacing my hand with stitches from a guy on the streets trying to stab me. In one visit, my medical records expressed that she is yelling extensively and is cursing loudly throughout the emergency department. She was punching a wall in the examining room. I would see the cells of county jails more times than I can count, and for 3 months roamed the yards of state prisons for women. My picture would be posted in the newspaper and displayed across the TV in the local news, depicting me like I was a big-time drug dealer, when in reality I was just selling small amounts of drugs to support my habit and survive. Eventually, track marks would note my arms as I tested positive for benzos, opioids, and methamphetamines. Throughout the years, I would visit hospitals, doctors, therapists, psychiatrists, and drug rehabs. At the age of 22, I would be involuntarily committed to a psychiatric ward after being questioned by paramedics. Medical records state her functional state is so poor that she is in active danger to herself. I was asked if I knew my name, the president, and the year. Staring blankly at them, not knowing what to answer, I was then escorted into an ambulance where I was placed in the captain's chair, asking a man in front of me, "Is it better to be lost or found?" I remember telling the hospital staff that I just didn't want to hurt in my heart anymore, all the while hearing audible whispers in my ear saying devil, and looking over at the man I was married to, seeing his face change into different people. The words, she has scattered open sores on her face, were written to describe my appearance, along with disheveled and unkempt. Clinicians expressed on paper, patient exhibits excessive and persistent worry about life. I would be labeled with anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder, psychosis, depression, and polysubstance abuse. There would be times when I had not eaten in days or bathed. Later, I would receive a phone call telling me my status for hepatitis C was positive due to sharing needles. I found myself trapped in an abusive marriage, not able to let go. My life would consist of constant arguing and fighting, bloody noses, black eyes, and broken bones. I felt like I was in a tug of war, addicted and afflicted, depressed and oppressed, accused and abused. My life was in shambles, and I thought I had crossed a threshold that I can never come back from. As you can tell from what I read, pretty much addiction took over. The drugs took over and controlled every aspect of my life. The addiction decided where I ate, what I ate, if I ate. Addiction decided where I slept, if I slept, and who I slept with. It decided everything. Ultimately, it decided who I was going to marry. I was the wife of a meth dealer, and I was the daughter of a heroin dealer. Of course, it didn't start with heroin, and it didn't start with meth. What it started with was alcohol and weed. and then from there it just slowly progressed. I started using the summer after 5th grade. So by the time I got to high school in my freshman year, I had already been using, and by the time I got to my freshman year, I was already introduced to opioids. And I was using opioids among other substances and alcohol, everything. And I was an A honor roll student. I was actually a varsity cheerleader. This is my picture in a Bessemer City High School cheerleading uniform. Throughout my years at school, I was very involved in sports, not just cheerleading, but I played softball as well. I was a member of the Beta Club, member of the Student Council. I was a member of the SAVE Club, Students Against Violence Everywhere. Even in elementary school, I participated in DARE, Drug Abuse Resistant Education, and won first place for the essay. Ironically, that was the same year that I started using drugs. And so Maceo talked about some of the signs of using opioids or using drugs. And some of those that he talked about, specifically the behavioral signs, all of those started to manifest in my life. Because for a while I was the good girl who was the bad girl who never got caught until my addiction caught up with me. And then all those signs that he talked about started manifesting in my life. So I began using with my family on the weekends, and from there it progressed to during the week, because the moment that I got high, I wanted to do it again because I loved the way that it made me feel. If I was feeling bad, I wanted to feel good. If I was feeling good, I wanted to feel better. And it seemed like drugs helped with that in the beginning. And so I didn't just want it to be a weekend thing. I wanted it to be an everyday thing. And so I started to seek out other people who were doing what I wanted to do. And so I found the kids in my school who were doing drugs. And so like that sign, that behavioral sign, I started to change friends. I started to change my peer group. And then I started skipping class. And then my grades dropped. So I went from an A honor roll student involved in all kinds of activities to the times that I would show up in class, I would just fall asleep. And then sometimes the teacher wouldn't even pass me out my work anymore. And then eventually, I had to leave Bessemer City High School, and then I went on to Burns and Kings Mountain and dropped out when I was 15. So I never actually got to graduate from high school. Eventually, I did go back and get my GED. My graduation year is 2010. I talked about in the paper that I read that from the years 2010 to 2015, how my physical state worsened and my mental state progressively deteriorated. So this picture was my freshman year. And then by the time my graduation year, 2010, I promise you I did not look like this girl right here. As I described, my appearance was totally opposite. If you recall, I talked about not even eating or bathing. So another sign that Maceo talked about, my appearance changed. So all those signs started to manifest. It didn't happen immediately. I started using the summer after 5th grade. I was 11 years old. I didn't start to see things manifest until my high school years. And then my early 20s is whenever things really got bad. And that was when, of course, I knew I had a problem. But by that time it was too late, right? Because I couldn't quit. I heard Tammy say that in the beginning it's a choice, and then after that it's really not a choice. Or Bill talked about how the drugs and addiction, it completely rewires your brain, and it does. It actually changes the whole structure of your brain, and especially the part where decision and judgment making is. And so that's what happened with me. And in the beginning it was a choice. I did choose to do drugs. And even after, either subconsciously or consciously, I was still choosing, but it was like I had no control over it. Like it was everything. It consumed me, and all I could think about was getting that next fix and getting that next high. And then whenever I became physically dependent on it, it was a whole nother ball game. And I found myself in this cycle, doing the same thing over and over again for years. and not understanding why these things were happening to me. And I would get a job, I would get a car, and I would get a place to stay, because that's what you're supposed to do in life, right? You're supposed to adult, and you're supposed to be responsible, and you're supposed to get those things. And that's what equals success. That's what means that you're doing good in life, if you can manage those things. Because I would look at my dad, and I would see him, shooting up, or I would see him smoking crack and doing all these crazy things, and then I would just be like, drinking a little bit of alcohol and smoking weed and thinking, oh, this is nothing. I'm not like him. That's what really, that's the person who has the problem over there. But before I knew it, I was right there with them, selling drugs with them, smoking crack with them, shooting heroin with them. So the best way that I can describe addiction and the behavior that goes along with it is like jumping off a cliff. So if you could just imagine for a moment, if you were to jump off a cliff, which I hope nobody would, and if you ever think about that, please reach out to somebody, because suicide is real. You might feel like you were flying for a little bit. Living the good life. Laughing, giggling. Oh, this is great, living the good life. Until you hit bottom. Until gravity catches up with you. And then you're met with that shocking impact. And that's what happened with me. I would jump off this cliff. I would be partying all the time, getting high, thinking I was living the good life. And then I would hit bottom. But what I found was that when I hit bottom, I could get back up. I could shake myself off a little bit and go right back to the top of the cliff, and like, I don't know what, I drank a little bit too much that night, or that was a little bit too big of a shot, we might need to tone it down. I know how to do it better next time, because I can manage it. It's no problem, I can handle it. I'd go to the top of the cliff, and then I'd jump off again, convincing myself that it's going to be different this time. Other times I would come to the top of the cliff, and I would convince myself that somehow be worth it. Like, sometimes I would know that it wouldn't be different, but I would jump anyways, because that moment's worth of pleasure was going to be worth the misery that followed it. That moment's worth of relief of whatever I wanted to get out of my head or get out of that moment in time. That relief was going to be all worth it. And then I'd jump, and then I'd hit bottom again. And that's when I would lose the job, and I would lose the car, and I would lose my house, and everything would fall to pieces, and because everything that come to my hands slipped through my hands, even the dope. Because whenever I was using drugs was the most important thing. So even whenever I attempted to go to college the first 2 times, finding ways and means to get more drugs became more important than finding ways and means to maintain a decent grade point average. And so I failed miserably. And that applied to every other area in my life too. Relationships, paying bills, taking care of myself, using the drugs and finding my next fix came before all of that. Even when I didn't want it to. Even when, I said, I'm never doing this again. Never doing this again. And I meant it with every fiber of my being. Not even telling my family and friends anymore. Just telling that to myself. But finding myself still doing it again. Finding myself at the top of that cliff, peering over the edge, saying, I'm not jumping, I'm not jumping, I'm not doing this, I'm not getting high. And then next thing you know, bam, I jumped again. And here I am at the bottom of this cliff at the same place I was in the beginning. And so I just did that over and over for years. Until the last time that I jumped off that cliff, and it was a little bit different this time. Because this time, I couldn't get back up. This time, I laid there lifeless, not knowing if I could ever get back up from the ground that I just barreled through. I remember staring into a fire because we heated with the wood stove in the house that we had at the time, because not a lot of times we had a house. And I just remember wondering, like I said in this paper, if I had crossed a threshold that I couldn't come back from, wondering if I was too far reached from sanity. And so that's whenever I started to seek God.
because I knew something was wrong. I knew something spiritually was wrong, and I knew drugs were definitely part of the problem, but I knew that it was just bigger than the drugs, because I could quit for a little bit, and I would go to rehab for like 30 days, right? And I wouldn't be doing drugs, but I still had all this other mess going on, because addiction is more, it involves more than just the use of drugs. Addiction affects every aspect of your being, physically, mentally, and spiritually, and all three have to be addressed. And so I started to seek out an understanding of God, and I grabbed a hold of an understanding, and I started reading the Bible, and I put my faith in Jesus, and something inside of me changed. And for the first time ever in my lifetime, I was able to gain some momentum, and I was able to quit using drugs for a period of time, or the drugs that I thought were the problem. But I still continue to drink. I did that in November 2015. By December, for Christmas, I went out to a bar, had some drinks with some family friends, thinking alcohol was okay. And then January, my birthday came, I went out with my mom and had a mixed drink to celebrate, because that's okay. It's legal, right? It's not the problem. Just meth and heroin and opioids was the problem. But then by February, I found myself hanging out with a bunch of guys every single weekend drinking beer. And then by March, I was back with my husband, and I was shooting heroin and liquid morphine and meth every single day. And so from there, I realized that having that relationship with God was not sufficient for me, that I needed something more. I needed a little bit of extra help. So I went back to rehab. I come out of rehab, went back to using once again for the 50th time. And it was during that summer that I finally decided to go to a 12-step program. I'd been against it before just because of reasons that I don't have time to get into. But I finally went. And from there, my life changed, because I found a community. Community is so important. Finding your tribe of people is so important. Healthy community. And I found community there, and I found people who had been through what I had been through and knew the way to go and how to get there, and who held my hand and took me along. And so I got a sponsor. I started working steps, and I started reading literature, and I just started to incorporate all these different aspects in my life. And I started to change, and my life completely changed. The inside of me changed, and then the outward part of my life started to change. I have a career now. The longest job I ever kept while using was for 6 months. I have been employed since 2016. For the majority of that, it was through a family restaurant. But now I work in a field of harm reduction. And I work for the Olive Branch Ministry and the Gaston County Opioid Overdose Response Team. I am on my 3rd attempt of college, and I am working really hard to bring my GPA back up from where I had failed miserably while on drugs. When I entered into college in 2018, my GPA was 0.40. I pretty much have almost a 4.0 GPA now. I'm going to school for human services geared towards substance abuse to get my associate's degree, and after that I will continue my education. But more importantly, I have purpose today. I have meaning today. My life has passion today. And so what I want you to take away today, I don't know what your situation is. I don't know if you've even ever used drugs, or if you may be using drugs right now, or if you have a family member or a loved one who may be using. But if you are using, like we've said before, don't use alone. And make sure that you carry Narcan, and we distribute that medication for free at no cost to those who are at high risk at the organization I work for. This medication can save a life. And we say don't use alone because, like we said earlier, you cannot administer this medication to yourself. And then also, whether you're using or whether you're not using, I heard the young man right here talk about a natural high. Find that natural high in your life. What drives you? What is your passion? Because the natural high of life will never run out. But the counterfeit high that drugs offer is just that. It's counterfeit. And it may be good in the beginning, but the end always results in death. And whether that death is a spiritual death or a physical death, either way, I wouldn't want to experience either one of them. Addiction is real, It's very real, but recovery is possible. If you have any questions for me, I'll be willing to answer. If you just want to talk, I'll be willing to talk. You can get with me after class or near the end of this session. I can give you a card with my number on it. If you want to hear more about my story, I do have a blog. I have a website. It's chastyking.com, CHASTY. If you can't remember the name, get with me and I'll give you one of my cards. But for now, I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Michelle, and she's going to speak with you and close us out.